Hey guys, welcome back to the channel McNallie Money, the official home of power mining analysis. A big episode for you today. We're going to be kicking it off with some great news out from Soluna Holdings, then following up with the main event, a head-to-head comparison between some of the top Treasury companies we've seen emerge over the last few years and some of our top picks in the Bitcoin mining / HPC AI space. This is going to be a really interesting comparison episode, a lot of data, a lot of discussion. Before we get into it, take a second, smash the like button, guys. Big help to myself and the channel. If you're not already subscribed, McNallie Money, feel free to join. And let us know in the comment section below which of these two strategies you prefer and which of these 6 companies is top of your list. With that being said, let's get into today's video. All right, guys, away we go. Tuesday afternoon, another exciting day in the Bitcoin mining space. This is starting to become somewhat of a regular thing around here at the Power Mining Analysis podcast. We have an interesting episode for you today. Going to be comparing, contrasting some of the top Treasury strategy companies with some of the top Bitcoin miner HPC AI strategies. Before we do, some news, and we did need to address Bitcoin price here, Anthony, now breaking out past 116,000. We're seeing some movement in names like Mara and CleanSpark. Generally, we've seen miners kind of front run a Bitcoin move, but nice to see the number one coin in the world is starting to get some momentum again.
Yeah, and over that 116 mark, it's been in the sort of like the 114, 115,000 position for quite a few days now, but breaking 116, let's hope it gets towards that all-time high of 124,000, not too far away. And there's a lot of expectation from some of the analysts out there saying it'll get high by the end of September, and then really by the end of the year, it could be significantly higher from where it is now.
Yeah, we sure hope that's the case. Now, what's been so interesting over the last few weeks here, Bitcoin, as you say, has been stuck in this holding pattern, but many of the top miners we cover on a regular basis have really taken off in recent weeks. We've been talking about this re-rate. We've been talking about the value of the power portfolio, the infrastructure that just wasn't being accounted for in the market cap of these companies. It seems the market is starting to wake up. If we look at the board today, again, mostly green across the Bitcoin mining space, and you can see a lot of these companies actually picking up steam as we talk here.
Yeah, no, Bitfarms is having another good day. And we've been saying that now for quite a few days. I mean, go back to before we arrived in New York, and Ben Gagnon, the CEO, had actually tweeted out there that he'd made a purchase of some shares in the company. So it's great when you see the CEO buying. He firmly believes that share price is undervalued, and he's gone out there and bought a significant chunk of shares there. Ever since that day, it's rallied. And when you listen to his presentation at the HC Wainwright conference, you get a feel that there's something special about to happen with Bitfarms there. I think the market's really anticipating an announcement. The stock itself has more than doubled in probably about a month. It was really struggling at one point in time. In fact, when we were on the podcast last time, I think we were even discussing with Ben what were the options for staying on the Nasdaq, because you have to maintain that dollar stance. But they're having a good day. CleanSpark and Mara also having a good day, considering those are the two stocks that really haven't embraced HPC in the way that some of their peers. Yes, Mara's now in the process of buying a subsidiary of EDF, which will give them a sort of a foothold in the space, but that's not gone through yet. That's likely to happen in Q4. Salman Khan spoke about that particular purchase again at the HC Wainwright conference, and a lot of these videos are available through the HC Wainwright website. So if you want to go and look at your favorite miners and see what their senior teams said, and most of these miners spoke at the conference itself, then go on the HC Wainwright website, just put in your details and you get access to the videos. So in terms of those that aren't performing today, well, I mean, IREN, is showing a slight downside, but I mean, IREN, in terms of where they were back in April and where they are today, is chalk and cheese. I mean, they've had a phenomenal run, and no one's going to begrudge a few shareholders maybe taking a little bit of profit off the table. But believe you me, everything looks likely that IREN will continue to be a bullish stock as they get towards announcing a client for Horizon 1 and then Sweetwater 1 and 2, which is their two enormous sites that are being developed as we speak for that HPC strategy.
Yeah, you're certainly right about that, Anthony. Now, if we bring up the heat map chart here, a multi-duration, you can see a lot of the trends you're talking about on the daily really extrapolated out over broader periods.
Yeah, and we can look at the fact that there's a couple of miners in the red there. But if you go back to the year-to-date changes now, far more green on the actual chart there. IREN obviously leading the way, 278%. Cypher and TeraWulf also having a phenomenal year in terms of the announcements from TeraWulf in getting that second contract and an extension to the second contract as well. And as we've already mentioned, Bitfarms more so from this last month, 105% up in a month there. But you can sort of start to see this recent period how more and more of the retail investors look like they've come back into this space, because we're seeing a lot more in terms of volumes from these stocks. Bitfarms, 115 million shares traded today already, and we're only sort of a couple of hours into trading. That's a phenomenal amount. They were never anywhere near that on a 3-month average. So, retail investors back into the space. Bear in mind, there's a lot of analysts out there covering Bitfarms now, and I'm likely to see covering more of these stocks in the heat map as more and more updates come out.
Yeah, it's nice to see our due diligence paying off here and more people coming into the space. You and I have been sticking it out through thick and thin. Now, one of the companies we've been following through the good and the bad, Soluna Holdings, this company has had some very high ups, over $8. It's had some low lows, similar to what we saw with Bitfarms. They've been receiving a lot of interest as well from social media lately. They've continued to come out with announcement after announcement, probably one of the most vocal companies so far this year that we cover. They've came out today with another strong announcement in terms of financing. And really, in my mind, this is kind of the missing component for Soluna. They've got a big pipeline. They've got a lot of experience. They've got these data centers up and running in practice. Now the problem is, how do you finance the scale out or the continuous build of more of these sites?
Absolutely. And today they've announced a 100 million facility from Generate Capital. So this funding is going to help them expand the portfolio now of green data centers. They've got a whole list of projects on the pipeline now, and this will help them fund some of those projects, like Project Catty, Dorothy 2, which is currently being finished as well, and 5 or 6 more projects continually ready to be put into motion once funding becomes available. This is the first time actually that John's they've been able to have 2 projects actually running in parallel because they've had significant funding raised. Now remember, they raised 30 million early in 2025 in capital early this year, with Spring Lane Capital and Galaxy coming to the table with financing. Obviously, we know Galaxy are going to be one of the main tenants at Catty, that 83 megawatt hosting facility for Bitcoin miners. 48 megawatts of that is going to be Galaxy as they shift their machines away from the Helios site so that they can contemplate moving their HPC strategy in line with what core we want to produce at that site there. Now, the initial 12.6 million of the 100 million will refinance and advance current projects, with further funding supporting the company's 1 gigawatt of pipeline. Here's a company that's literally valued at just over $20 million with a 1 gigawatt pipeline of power. And you can understand, retail investors might not understand it, but you can see the market starting to pick up on this, and companies like Generate Capital, companies like Spring Lane, and large public companies like Galaxy Digital also picking on the fact that Soluna are certainly a company that's punching above their weight.
Yeah, and we've used that terminology quite a lot on the channel. The nice thing here for me, I'm glad you brought up Spring Lane. It's great to see multiple financing partners now coming into the space. For a long time, a lot of these banks and financial institutions wanted nothing to do with Bitcoin mining or Bitcoin miners. But again, you can see this sentiment starting to change as more widespread adoption occurs. Now, the final piece of housekeeping here before the main event, Wi-Fi or White Fiber coming out with their Q2 earnings tomorrow. This is actually the first quarterly report they've done as an independent subsidiary of Bit Digital. We've reached out to Sam Tabar, hoping to have him on the channel to talk about that in more detail. Now, the main event here, we just talked about a sentiment shift in the Bitcoin mining space. This is a theme we've brought up a lot over the last 18 months. There's different parts of this 4-year cycle. There's different proxies that obviously benefit at different parts of that cycle. We've chosen to cover on the Bitcoin mining companies specifically, but there's a lot that are involved in the Treasury side of things as well. And recently we've seen those pop up. You came across a letter actually from David Bailey to the Nakamoto shareholders. That company is doing business through Kindly MD currently, really expressing some, I guess, concerns that the investor base has brought up. David Bailey, most well known obviously for the Bitcoin conference, Bitcoin Magazine. He's trying to essentially put shareholders at ease here. I'll let you summarize this, and then maybe we can talk about this Treasury strategy in a bit more detail.
Yeah, this is interesting. You know, you've got the chairman and CEO of Kindly MD, David Bailey, who we know, he's been running the Bitcoin conferences, not just in the US, but literally around the globe over the last few years. And we've been fortunate to attend some of these conferences as speakers, most notably Las Vegas and Nashville, and also in the Bitcoin conference in Amsterdam. So he's put out a letter to put shareholders' minds at rest effectively. A lot of these treasury companies came out in the last few months there, and we saw those massive spikes initially go back to April, May, where literally some of these companies were gaining, not 2x, 3x, they were gaining 5, 10, 15, 20x in terms of valuations. And that was never going to be, able to continue at that level. And we've seen a lot of them now pull back significantly. That now actually, a lot of them look pretty much undervalued to a certain extent. When you consider the amount of assets in terms of Bitcoin or Ethereum assets on the balance sheet. So he's trying to put shareholders' minds at rest here by saying, look, he's been in this space for 13 years. He's been through those 4 bear cycles. He's seen all the drawdowns. And at the end of the day, he's come through all that. And he expects the company to come through all that as well. And he just wants to put your mind at rest as a shareholder, by letting you know. And we've seen that in the Bitcoin mining space as well. We've seen that, the likes of Ben Canyon spoke exactly the same in terms of what they're doing, and how their share price had got, significantly low, down to close to 50 cents a share. And like literally 3 or 4 weeks later, we're all cheering now because it's $2.80. This is probably a sort of like a parallel scenario for the Bitcoin treasury companies, and we'll come on to talk about some of those other treasury companies in a second.
Yeah, we certainly will. Now, he also outlines their Bitcoin treasury strategy or Bitcoin strategy in the article as well, noting the raise of capital to build Bitcoin denominated treasury, investing into Bitcoin or Bitcoin focused companies, earning Bitcoin linked income, which we started to see some of the miners do as well, and compounding their Bitcoin per share or Bitcoin yield, which is a common metric in the treasury space or sector. So as you say, potentially some worried or nervous investors. This got us thinking, why don't we do an episode comparing, contrasting some of the benefits, the return profile, and maybe the strategy between these treasury organizations and the miners, which we've covered again extensively on the channel. So we tried to get a bit of a sample size here, Anthony. You put together one of your nice little heat map tables. Again, multiple durations here. IREN, Riot, and Bitfarms on the Bitcoin mining side. IREN obviously has no HODL. They've got a tremendous portfolio of power. Riot has a great portfolio of power with a great HODL. And then Bitfarms, as you just alluded to, smaller player, newer to the HPC game here, but a very interesting portfolio of assets in a different market, being the PJM market versus ERCOT. Now, on the treasury strategy side of things, again, a nice sample size. We've obviously got Michael Saylor in strategy, the founder of this treasury strategy or treasury adoption. Then we've got Metaplanet, again, a more recent player to the game. And we threw in SBET or SharpLink Gaming just to get a sample size across other cryptocurrencies, or mainly Ethereum here. So why don't you walk us through what you're seeing on this heat map? Then we'll take a look maybe under the hood at each one of these 6 companies.
Yeah. And if you look at the time periods, it looks like it's a tale of two halves, effectively. The Bitcoin miners go back to last year was sort of, the Bitcoin, we'd had the halving and the Bitcoin price, hadn't rallied before, this was before the election, all that. And it was very challenging for miners to make any profit there. And we'd known that Core Scientific was really the one big miner with a big deal on the table, and a few others trying then to start copying that. Move forward 12 months, we're in a whole different space now. And as you can see from the numbers, if you go back a year ago and look at the performance of IREN, 376%, Riot 148, Bitfarms 41%. Now go back a year ago. Remember, we had that, or just over a year ago, we had the news that Riot were looking to go all in and purchase Bitfarms, and the share price was over that $2.40, so not as big an increase. But then, as that deal didn't come off, the share price of both Riot and Bitfarms started to falter, and now we're seeing Bitfarms' performance on its own now. So Riot have got a very, very small position in Bitfarms, nothing to be overly concerned with from a Bitfarms management position. But look at the month change in Bitfarms, 102% just in the last month there. IREN, even though they've had massive changes over last year, 77% up, and Riot up 40% up. Now, if we look at the Treasury management companies, it was basically the opposite. They had a phenomenal running strategy, are the biggest and are probably, if any companies like to succeed in the Treasury management process, or system, they're the ones that are going to do it. They've got a significant amount of Bitcoin, heading towards 640,000 Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And they want that magic target of getting to 5% in the near term, and maybe even an aspiration of getting to 10% of all Bitcoin. Metaplanet were well placed. They're a Japanese hotel company to start off with, and there wasn't many options in Japan for investors to invest in something Bitcoin related. And so when they started their treasury management company, the share price absolutely rocketed. And you can see there, their share price hasn't been a year. So I've had to take from when they started as a listed company, so not quite a year for them, but you can see from that period when they started, even though we've seen the share price pull back now, still 162% higher. It was $1.60 when they started trading as Metaplanet. It's currently today $4.19. Now it has been as high as $16. So the price at the moment, it represents literally 25% of where it's been, and it would take an increase in price of 281% to get back to its 52-week high. So that just tells you the volatility of both of these types of industries. But what it shows me is, and we mentioned it earlier in the podcast, it looks like, investors start moving in between different plays. And we saw them when it was Bitcoin mining start to move away from Bitcoin mining and look at those companies that were dealing with HPC. And then the miners started to move into the HPC space, and the investors came back. And we'll talk a little bit more company by company as we show you some more slides and from the presentations.
Yeah, it's clear you can see there's a shift in the markets or the timing of these proxies. Now, the first one we wanted to discuss, strategy. This is obviously the OG in the space, Michael Saylor's baby. We talk about MNAV compression. This one was well above 3 at one point. When we talk about MNAV, that's essentially the value of all the Bitcoin compared to the market cap of the company. You can see now sitting in the 1.47 range, so still receiving that benefit. But as we'll see with Metaplanet and SBET, this is on the downward trajectory, and really for a lot of these companies struggling to even stay above 1.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've said that strategy lead the way in this particular sector here. Bear in mind, go back 6 years ago, this was $1 billion company, and today it's a $93 billion company. So I don't think all the shareholders are too unhappy about what's happened there, but they are getting pulled back a little bit there. And at one point, they were well over $100 billion and looking certain to go into the S&P 500. Time will tell whether that will happen there. It looks like they've ticked all the boxes. But you still have to get voted into that indice. But at the moment, not just strategy, but all these treasury management companies are starting to find this pressure on the fact that they're not being given, a premium as high as what they were given previously. And when you think about potentially where the Bitcoin price could be, and my understanding was like, obviously it's inflation proof, but actually if Bitcoin price is going to grow to 200, 250,000, like some of those big analysts said to us in New York when we attended an investor conference earlier this year, and maybe to $1 million in the next few years, like Kathy Wood explained, and a number of other, really big, investment bank CEOs have said they expect it to get higher. And if you go longer term, Michael Saylor will point to a figure of close to 13 million. Then maybe these MNAVs are a bit low at the moment from where they should be.
Yeah, the one thing I will say about strategy, I think the market really does love the consistency, the clear vision, the fact Michael Saylor's communicated he will never sell Bitcoin. They're continuing to buy. They actually came out with another buy this week for 60 million. But of all the companies, we feel this is the most viable because of the financial engineering, because of the size of their balance sheet, their Bitcoin hodl, but potentially a concern for some of these newer entrants to the space.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, Metaplanet, speaking of the newer entrants, you mentioned this is a hotel operator in Japan. This one saw a lot of interest out of the gate as people were looking for exposure to Bitcoin. As you mentioned, there wasn't a lot of proxies in the market. If we look at the MNAV on Metaplanet, it's currently at 1.34, so a slight discount from strategy. But I'll let you walk through the chart here, Anthony. If you look at the graph of MNAV, very similar to the share price for some of these treasury strategy companies.
Yeah, I mean we've got the chart from literally the last the last year or so, and you can see probably around about the June-July time last year, the MNAV of Metaplanet was as high as 23, a premium of 23 times the value of the Bitcoin on the balance sheet. And that was the influx of investors in Japan trying to get a piece of this company because that gave them a piece of investment in Bitcoin itself. But you can see ever since that date there, it's pulled back and pulled back and pulled back. And even though we've had a couple of tweaks getting closer to sort of 7, it's now dropped closer to, like say 1.34, it's MNAV at the moment, and getting closer and closer to 1, which means then that the value is literally the value of the company, the value of its parts.
Yeah, the final one we wanted to bring up here, one of the Ethereum treasury companies, SharpLink Gaming. This is another one that's received a lot of attention recently, but unlike even Metaplanet or Strategy, you can see they're actually below 1 for their MNAV. Now, this is something we've seen with a lot of these Ethereum treasury companies. We've seen even Solana, Dogecoin companies pop up as well. The real question for me is what is the underlying business and what is the differentiator compared to any other company that raises money to buy Ethereum?
Yeah, absolutely. And, that we've listened to Sam Tabar talk about the strategy because they were effectively the first ones to adopt a treasury management strategy. They had over 20,000 Ethereum well over 18 months ago on the balance sheet. And even since then, they made the decision, which a lot of people have raised eyebrows over, to sell their Bitcoin and change it into Ethereum. And it's actually worked out quite well for them because Ethereum has, in the last sort of 4 or 5 months, outperformed Bitcoin itself. Now we've seen more and more of the treasury management companies go into Ethereum. Ethereum's got a lot more, a lot more protocols than Bitcoin itself. Bitcoin is just really it's an asset of value. You buy it, you store it, you wait for it to grow. That's what it does. It's like we talk about digital gold. You buy gold, you put it in a safe. You wait for it, 20 years, you come back and hopefully it's increased in value. Bitcoin's outperformed every asset class over the last 14 years. So we don't have to wait 20 years for Bitcoin. And Ethereum has also performed really well. It's not as old as Bitcoin. It's been around a lot less than Bitcoin. But we started to see a lot more of these treasury management companies out there. And bear in mind, when we started talking about SharpLink, which was literally only, 2 or 3 months ago, and you had the likes of Bit Digital at the time had over 100,000 Ethereum, and there was a little bit of a race there. Who's going to get the most? Well, SharpLink now have sort of like literally taken the game to themselves. They've already got over 838,000 Ethereum on the balance sheet there. But as you quite rightly say, that the MNAV is less than one, which suggests that they're getting zero premium. In fact, if they sold their Ethereum, the parts of the company, it's valued more than the company itself.
Yeah, just incredible. So it'll be interesting to see how this pans out over time, especially going into the next bear cycle. We would estimate there's some consolidation and potentially some deals available if companies are below that MNAV. Now, transitioning over to the Bitcoin miners slash HPC side of things, you rightly said it looks like sentiment has shifted. There's people coming back into the space. We've seen that across our platform. But what's interesting here is the rapid rate of change. So we kick off each one of these miners with a 1-year chart. You guys can see these were down and out. IREN essentially trading flat in that $10 range for months and months. There was so many comments calling the miners dead money, saying this sector was going nowhere. But as you can see, just since April, you could have picked shares up under $5.50. IREN is nearing $37 today. I'll let you talk about some of the reasons why, but this is how quickly things can change in the Bitcoin mining space.
Absolutely. I mean, I remember, Bryce, we were in Denton last year for the Core Scientific update. And during that period, in June 2024, the IREN share price was getting closer and closer up towards $15 at that point in time. So we're only showing a 1-year chart here, but that 1-year chart shows the fact that it obviously came back down to the $10, sat around that range for quite a while. And then in April, when effectively we had sort of like a bear period, every miner, my portfolio dropped, 40, 50% very, very quickly. And I was scratching my head because, we do a lot of research. We sort of understand a lot of the miners and IREN especially. We've covered IREN. I've been covering IREN for 3.5 years, ever since they IPO'd. And I've always related to the fact that when I do the comparison charts, they tend to be out there at number one, ahead of the pack. And so I have firm faith, into it. And I've been buying shares all the way back, from that bear period at the end of 2022, when the shares were like just literally over $1 each. Now, you could have got into IREN this year, $5.47, and effectively, you would increase by nearly 700% in the space of 5 months. That's a sort of, the potential increase we can see in some of these mining stocks. We've told people they are volatile, but it's not just about, the share price. It's about the company as well. What they've delivered this year, every target they've put out over the last 18 months, they've delivered. They had a target of June last year to get to 10 exahash. They delivered. They had a target to the end of the year of 20 exahash. They turned around halfway through and said, let's make that 30. They achieved 30 exahash. Another 20 exahash in the first 6 months of this year. And then they turn around and say, in parallel to that, we're going to grow our HPC strategy, and we've got some enormous sites that we're going to deliver that. Oh, and by the way, just so that we can prove we can deliver this, we're going to do it in-house to start with, to make sure that we understand the process, understand the business model, and then we can determine which strategy we take forward. And that's something that's impressed a lot of people in the space there. They can deliver an on-demand service there, currently achieving over $28 million. And that's before they just increased all these latest GPUs going into that Prince George site in North America. So I quite like, IREN in terms of what they have available. We've talked about already on the podcast about the Childress site there. And we even talked about the fact that Dan said, if the deal comes along, which is a better deal than Bitcoin mining, he will use the whole of that 750 megawatts at Childress to deliver HPC. And that's having just created, effectively, one of the largest hash rates in the Bitcoin mining space, the most efficient hash rate, and and with one of the cheapest energy attached to that. And he's prepared to put HPC in that site there. He's thinking of the shareholders only. He wants the return there for shareholders. Return on investment's key for them. And they've also got this small site called Sweetwater. That's another 2 gigawatts of power, which Sweetwater 1 will be available in April 2026 when it's energized. And Sweetwater 2 is targeted to be energized in late 2027. So lots of updates on the way for IREN.
Yeah, you're certainly right about that. And what's so interesting to me is realistically, these CEOs, Daniel has been telling us exactly what they're going to do. He's been telling us these targets, this strategy for years. Now they're just executing on it, and the market is finally waking up. Another great example of that, Tyler Page, Cypher, he's literally told us they're going to have a client by year end. The market, for whatever reason, is still not fully pricing that in, and you see the share price creeping up day after day. And that's why it's so important to watch these interviews and get this information firsthand. So IREN's a great example of execution. The market now starting to re-rate or wake up to that. Another one near and dear to both of our hearts, Riot Platforms. We went down to Corsicana. This company was down and out. I would say it was probably one of the lowest retail sentiment miners that we covered on the channel. Again, if you go back only a few short months, April, this was trading sub 650. They'd now broken $17, and I still think there's tremendous value in Riot.
Yeah, a lot of people, haven't given Riot any credit for what they've done over the last sort of 18 months. We were very fortunate to get invited to Corsicana, have a look at that flagship site when it was energized back in June last year. And we were impressed from the day we were down there, not just because the barbecue was excellent, but because the facility, 400 megawatts of energized buildings there with all the latest micro BT immersion cooled machines built specifically for immersion cooling. So no need to have to start taking fans off or changing the machines themselves as they go in the fluid, pop them straight into the fluid and get them earning revenues. Bear in mind, like IREN, they were able to access cheap energy in Texas in that location, and that's been a great benefit for them. They've improved their operational performance. They're now one of the top two miners on a monthly basis with IREN in terms of operational performance in 2025. We can see now from the sites, from the photographs that you're showing on the screen, both of those sites there clearly plenty of potential for HPC. Corsicana has 600 megawatts available. They bought extra land at those sites there to cover that requirement. They've got the water, they've got the fiber, they've got the power in place. Everything ticks all the boxes. And people saying, well, it's 600 megawatts is enormous. The biggest data center in Europe itself is 150 megawatts. So if they can fill out the 600 megawatts at Corsicana, you're going to have one of the biggest data centers in the world. And then they've got the Rockdale facility, which again is a 700 megawatt site. Now, at both these sites, interestingly enough, they have obviously a significant amount of Bitcoin mining. They're getting towards 40 exahash of mining operating at the moment. Now, if you think about by the time a client named and deal is signed off and the refurbishment carried out, they've got some great cash flow coming in to meet that requirement. And by the time that requirement is fulfilled, the chances are the Bitcoin mining for most of these miners will be closer to the next halving, when literally it's going to be really challenging for miners to make any profit. So they're going to make the most of making profits between now and April 2028 to deliver refurbished facilities, to deliver co-location deals to some of the big clients that have been talked about at the moment.
Yeah, the other X factor for me with Riot, they've also got a great HODL, seventh on the HODL 15 top 100, over 19,000 Bitcoin. So you almost get a hybrid strategy here between the treasury company and the operating business. The other thing I think people just really don't give Riot enough credit for, we're going to talk about Bitfarms next. They just came out with some great renderings of their Panther Creek data center campus, or what that could look like. We've been to Corsicana, and it literally looks like those renderings in real life. This stuff is built, it's operating. The water retention ponds are there. They're full of water. The substations are operating. I don't think people really give enough credit to what Riot has built. They also have ESS Metron, which they purchased, that creates a lot of this power infrastructure in-house. So a great company, again, to take a look at in this re-rate process. Now, I just mentioned Bitfarms. This is an incredible chart. I don't remember many charts in my investing career that have that up and to the right so aggressively here in in the recent week or so. This one, similar to IREN, similar to Riot, it's had some ups, it's had some downs. It was trading sub $1. We had Ben on talking about NASDAQ delisting strategy or what he could do about that. Lo and behold, a few weeks later, we're almost at $3, and it looks like a rocket ship has taken off this page.
Yeah. And you've got, a table there saying 75 cents. The actual low for the last 52 weeks was 67 cents. So, that's grown 400% in that short period of time there. He had no concerns when we raised it on the podcast, and he was proven right again. And, if you listen to Ben's recent podcast, listen to the update he gave at HC Wainwright, which is available, you'll understand why this company has got, great facilities. They've made the decision to move everything effectively now into North America, primarily into the US, and having purchased Stronghold Mining and bought those sites. The Panther Creek site, the location of that site there is surrounded by 8 or 9 other sites that are currently being used by hyperscalers. You're in the sort of hyperscaler vicinity. And so it's just a matter of time before we announce something. And I think the market is certainly pricing in some sort of an announcement very quickly for Bitfarms. Remember, they've already got that agreement with Macquarie. There's a 300 million credit facility for them to use there. They've already started using it, and as the designs get approved, there'll be further of that 300 million out to flow into it. Pennsylvania itself, they have 1 gigawatt of pipeline. So, we talk about Corsican having 600 megawatts. We talk about Rockdale. Bitfarms have got a very similar amount of power available, all in one state there, Pennsylvania. And if you look at the data centers that have already been recently contracted out in that state itself, $90 billion worth of contracts have been signed in most recently. Ben talked about the power there. It's got a robust energy and fiber infrastructure. They've also got sites at Washington and Quebec, 18 megawatts at Washington, 170 megawatts at Quebec there. So, when you look at a company of their size there, with a pipeline of 1.2 gigawatts, and Ben won't be standing back and waiting. They'll be looking for, potential sites for the future, but their focus now is deliver Panther Creek there. We heard 6 months ago when we were back in Miami, the number of people in the space there, some of the bankers from Wall Street were saying that was a site that ticked every box, and we're starting to believe more and more that when we were told that's come absolutely true now to the cause. And wish Ben all the best of luck with the company. I mean, they're doing a great job at the moment.
Yeah, and we heard that from Tyler Page at the conference as well. Don't assume these companies are just sitting on these portfolios idly. The people who are responsible for finding these sites, finding this power, putting through the agreements, they still work at these companies. They're still showing up. They're still looking for opportunities. We've actually got a clip from Ben here from HC Wainwright talking about how the value of each one of these megawatts continues to go up as deals are signed. So we'll play that one quick, then we'll wrap up the miners.
So what's going to happen here is that you don't actually want to lock yourself into a term sheet with a hyperscaler today. What you want to do is you want to execute. You want to bring that closer and closer and closer to the point where the customers are getting increasingly more desperate and they're willing to pay increasingly higher prices. That's how you lock in higher margins and higher revenues. And so this is exactly aligned with how we view the market.
So as you can see there, not only do these companies have extremely valuable portfolios, but each and every one of the hyperscalers that signs these deals essentially takes megawatts off the market. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention on Bitfarms, you can see a bunch of lines on this page. Those are actually international fiber lines through the ocean. So the Washington and Pennsylvania sites, very strategic in terms of that big fiber coming into the North American market. So with that being said, and similar to what we just looked at on the Bitcoin miner side, if you look at the 1-year graph on the Bitcoin Treasury or Ethereum Treasury companies, quite a different tale, and really supports what you're mentioning about this shift or rotation. In each one of these 3 cases, a tremendous spike out of the gate, and then that dwindling off we've seen not only with MNAV, but share price as well.
Yeah, you've got the Kindly chart here, which is the Nakamoto subsidiary, and if you look at the year to date, actually the 1 year chart, still 20% up, but actually at $1.52, it's a big fall from where it was back in sort of May when it achieved over $25 for a short space of time, and since that period has sort of like pulled back there. Hence, David having to write to shareholders saying, not to worry. These are the sort of things that happen. It's volatile space, but we've been through enough cycles to know that we'll come through the other side of this.
SharpLink has a very similar approach here. Chart, you can see a flash in the pan, so to speak, right out of the gate. We saw those MNAVs just absolutely balloon. Now things have come back down to reality. You mentioned in the intro, could be a potential buying opportunity if you've got that long-term conviction. But for me, again, the real question here is, how do these companies differentiate? The final chart we wanted to look at, strategy. I think you and I both agree, of all the treasury companies, this one probably has the best chance of excelling or succeeding. And I would attribute that to, number one, first mover advantage. And secondly, some of the financial engineering that Saylor's put together. He walked us through this in New York last week. And for me, this is a major differentiator from any of these other treasury companies. Saylor has essentially recreated an entire financial suite of instruments here.
Yeah, and he's done things that no other business would have even considered, and it's worked very well. And the risk profile actually is minimal to the company. They operate a number of different strategies to raise capital. And again, if you've not seen any of Michael's recent presentations, I suggest go to YouTube, go to the H.C. Wainwright. He was the head speaker on day one there, and we were in awe. We were sat on the third row, and just for 45 minutes, just mind blown at that presentation there. I firmly believe if any company can get through the treasury management space, then strategy will lead the way by a long way.
So with that being said, you guys, some good questions here, some good discussion. Let us know in the comment section below. Do you buy into the treasury strategy approach? Do you prefer the Bitcoin miners or some sort of a hybrid, potentially like a Mara, a Riot, a CleanSpark of that nature? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Again, in our opinion here, there's different parts of the cycle, different times to have exposure to various proxies. And right now it seems the Bitcoin miners, the HPC, the AI plays are where the money is flowing. So that's all for today. Hit the like button, you guys. Feel free to subscribe. We'll see you back here tomorrow.